Hi guys, what's going on, and welcome back to another episode of Total War Arena. So it's going to be a little bit of a different type video today. We're going to be taking a look basically at consumables. So it's going to be a bit of a stat-based video. I don't think we're going to get into any battles or anything, so it might not be the video type for everyone, but hopefully it will be sort of interesting and maybe slightly educational, or at least explain my sort of thought process when I'm picking consumables. Because there's quite a lot of options and there's not really anything in game to sort of explain what's the best thing to take. And I think a lot of people aren't necessarily aware what the best sort of combinations are. So I think the first thing to say is I will always take consumables whether I'm at tier 1 or tier 10. I think you should always be trying to take consumables. You know, it does make a real big difference to your gameplay, and it can often provide quite big buffs. You know, particularly if you're running a premium account, then you should really easily be able to make enough money. I mean, you can see I've got nearly 10 million silver now. And I'm running consumables full time, so realistically it's not a detriment in terms of my silver income, so you should always be running consumables. Obviously tiers 1 to 6 you'll only get access to 1 consumable, but once you hit tier 7 with units you then can start picking 2 consumables per time, and you should be doing that making use of both slots because they give quite a lot of buffs. So then once you get into consumables, they're broadly broken down into 2 different types. So you have permanent, so like passive consumables, like Anatha's Blessings and Baal's Sacrifice. These add base stats to the unit permanently for the whole time you have that consumable on the unit. So if you have restock, that means it's permanently on, basically, and you're just paying each battle. Then the other type of is a sort of a consumed consumable, for want of a better word. For example, Blinders, because it's activated, you get 1 use, you can use it once in the battle, and it lasts for 10 seconds. So you can see Blinders, it makes the unit unroutable, but it only does so for 10 seconds. And that's it done, finished, no more for that battle, and you're paying the same price as just one of the passive consumables. So you have to really consider if it's sort of worthwhile, and in my case, in my opinion, these active consumables that you use up and only last 10 seconds are just never worth it. So for example, one I was looking at, I wanted to compare with say Payday. So for 10 seconds, and this is only 10 seconds it lasts, you're getting 20% movement speed. Well, my dash gives me 15% movement speed for 5 seconds, and in 10 seconds after that ending, I can activate it again. So, you know, a 20% movement speed for 10 seconds is no great buff. Then it's 10% melee weapon damage. Now, this can often be a bit confusing to people because it puts both the abilities put both percentage, say with Payday here, and then it just gives a physical plus 10, or say on Anatha's Blessing. So which one is better? Well, we can work it out. The 10% melee weapon damage, obviously we just go over to the damage. All consumables act upon the base value, so not counting increased equipment and stuff. So it's 10% onto the 205 weapon damage. So that means you're getting 20.5 increased weapon damage for 10 seconds with your Payday. So 20.5, I'll say 20 just for ease of math. Not that much. And then if you go back to here, you can have plus 10 with Anatha's Blessing, and that's permanent. It doesn't last 10 seconds, it lasts the whole 15 minutes of the battle. So that's so much better. You're getting 5% with this permanently, or a 10% boost for 10 seconds. It's just not worth it. Which is why I think these sort of short-term buffs should always be ignored as a general rule. Some people seem to like the Whetstones, but again, plus 75% melee weapon damage. Penetration damage, sorry. So when you work out what that actually is, so these guys, for example, have a base penetration damage of 27, so you're going to add 75% to that for like 20. Well, you know, you're only getting plus 20 for 20 damage, base damage for 10 seconds, or you can have plus 10 damage for the whole game. So it's the same sort of thing. It's just not really worth it. Particularly when the weapon damage on these guys is sufficiently high enough that it's always going to be exceeding body armor anyway. So penetration is just a base statistic. It's not going to be the key factor in your damaging ability. So yeah, I feel that these active consumables are pretty worthless. So right, without going on for that too much, then what sort of picks? What decides what consumables you should pick when you're getting into battle? So, for example, we looked at some here. Let's switch to a different unit, so we're getting sort of a bit of an overview of some different people. Some, for example, Romans are quite a good example because they don't have a lot in the way of choice. So if you break down into what the Romans actually have available to them, they have only really 3 options. Unless you want to defend artillery or something and you're taking stakes or something, then that's a separate thing. But in terms of just an active fighting Germanicus, you've got Weaponsmith, drill sergeant, or armor smith. So then it's kind of breaking down what each consumable gives you and is it of use. So for example, the weaponsmith is great because it's increasing your damage, your attack and your melee defense. I always tend to like consumables that increase your aggression. That's always going to be useful for you. You know, you're always going to be fighting enemies. That's literally the sole purpose of this game. So having increased damage, you know, increased melee attack, and then a little bit of extra defense is always going to be a good thing. So that kind of always pushes me towards being inclined to take things like weaponsmith. And partly, I think having better aggression over better defense is kind of a good thing, with a few exceptions. So then you've got, say, a toss-up between armor smith and drill sergeant. So if we look at it on the face of it, we see it's +8 body armor on each. So okay, they're both the same. And you're getting +4 missile block chance to +6 melee attack, so a bit more aggression with the drill sergeant. And then +1 shield armor to +4 melee defense. So let's break that down. So the body armor is the same. For 4 missile block chance, is that useful on a Germanicus Roman? Well, not really. Why? Well, they have a pretty high base missile block chance anyway. It's at 55. And they obviously get access to Testudo, which gives them that huge increase to missile block chance, which pushes their missile block chance already over 100. So that means they're not going to be able to be damaged frontally or side on by any enemy ranged units anyway. So is adding another +4 going to be useful in many situations? Not really. Very occasionally, maybe if you're engaging enemies and archers are focusing firing on you, they may be able to get some hits on you while you're in a fight and you can't have Testudo on. But +4 is not going to make much difference anyway, and in most situations that's not going to be useful. So we can discount that as a useful part of the consumable. So then what's next? +1 shield armor. Well, this kind of comes down to just having a bit of knowledge of how the unit stats interact in this game. So body armor and shield armor have exactly the same ratio. 1 body armor will remove 1 weapon damage. So there's just a 1-to-1 relationship. So 200 weapon damage would be stopped by 200 body armor. So given that this adds 8 body armor, adding then just 1 shield armor is only an eighth of the first ability. You know, it's a very small stat increase. +1 shield armor, basically nothing. And it doesn't even apply. If you get shot in the back or stabbed in the back, then your shield armor no longer applies. So it's just a worse version of body armor and only +1. So while it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's very little of an increase. So really that discredits armor smith as a useful consumable to me, compared to drill sergeant, which is giving that +6 melee attack, which is certainly a good thing. It's increasing your ability to land hits, and then +4 on the melee defense. You only have to look at your melee defense to see that your base melee defense is 47. So adding 4 to that is almost like a 10% increase to your melee defense. That's actually quite a decent buff. Certainly much more significant +1 on the shield armor. That's my point. So that's kind of how I think you should be trying to sort of tactically look at your consumables and break down the different statistics each one has, and then making your decisions based off that. And then we could have a look at let's have a look at something so like archers, where it can get a little bit more complicated. Let's have a look at the barbarians because they've got a better selection. So for ranged units, I think it gets more complicated, and this more comes down to a personal preference of how you like to play. So for me personally, I feel like archers I have enough going on when I'm playing archers, just targeting, trying to keep safety with cavalry and things like that. So I'm not a fan of having to then trying to micromanage active consumables like the different arrow types. But some people do, or are both capable of doing that better than me, and enjoy it. So that comes into a little bit of a choice. But I mean, there's some 2 great passive consumables of the barbarian archers. For example, the sacrifice animals, that +9 missile weapon damage is hugely significant, because it bumps up their base damage enough to be starting to take it over most units' body armor values, particularly in the rear. So it means their damage ramps up significantly with things like this +9. And I think we get a bit of extra range and movement speed with this, yeah, with the hunt, which is always nice. Who doesn't want a bit of extra movement speed? But if, for example, you were looking at taking active consumable arrows, then you've got to break down what you want to achieve with the various ones you've got. So, for example, bodkin head arrows. What are you gaining? You're gaining +14 range, so not a massive amount of range. A little bit, but not loads, particularly when considering you're getting +7 on the passive anyway. And so you're only getting double on the bodkins, but you're losing 56 weapon damage. So that means your weapon damage is going to be to the point where it's going to do nothing over body armor values, because every unit will have more body armor than whatever that will work out as, like 130, something like that. So it would make the effectiveness of your archers quite diminished, and even with the +6 penetration, you know, you're going to be reducing your damage quite a lot potentially, particularly if you're shooting against lightly armoured units. So okay, so personally I'd probably be reluctant to take bodkins. Then you get something like, say, broadhead arrows. Now that's a lot more interesting, isn't it? That +42 missile weapon damage, given these guys already have quite a decent weapon damage. You're going to be adding onto that, and that's probably almost all going to apply onto enemy units. You know, if you're shooting Falksmen, that's going to fully take up that +42. It's going to be really effective. And while you lose a little bit of penetration damage, I think your weapon damage is going to be so exceeding the damage of the enemy armor that it's going to be really effective anyway. So that's quite an interesting choice, and so on you can go. There seems little reason to take heavy flaming arrows above broadhead arrows, for example, because the weapon damage increases less and you're losing range, whereas you don't on the broadheads. And in fact, the heavy flaming arrows, I'd say, are an entirely useless consumable. +2 missile weapon penetration. Well, you're going to get same as body armor is a one-to-one relationship. Penetration is just one penetration point is 1 damage, and 1 weapon damage is 1 damage. It's just that penetration ignores all armor values and just applies that as a base statistic. So you're going to get +2. But here, because the missile weapon damage is going to be so high anyway, you're probably going to get +40 to your damage. So broadhead arrows are far superior to the heavy flaming arrows, except in a very few specific situations. And then you can have a massive increase to weapon range for a little bit of reduction in damage. +48 range. Yeah, again, you know, trilobite arrows are far superior to these bodkin arrows. Absolutely would be taking the trilobite arrows. If you want extra range, then they're giving you a good buff to extra range, and they're not quite so harshly reducing your weapon damage. Okay, you lose a little bit of penetration, but I'd put the trilobites up and above the bodkins. So hopefully this is just giving you an idea of how I think when I'm trying to look at different consumables, what I'm sort of working through, what statistics are important to try and buff, and what are kind of irrelevant and you can get away with not worrying about. And obviously this varies from different unit, and it's not even faction specific. You know, a lot of the time the unit types change from different factions as you move through the tech tree, and therefore the consumable needs are going to change as well. And of course it also changes based sometimes if you're in a party. You know, maybe if you're going in a party and one of them's artillery, you might want to take a unit of stakes with your Romans, something like that. So, you know, it's a really sort of choppy and changeable thing. So hopefully that was vaguely clear. That was certainly long. I feel like if anyone is still watching at this point in the video, it will be a miracle. Because I've just talked for like 10 minutes probably. I can't. 12 minutes. Nice. That's good going. So hopefully you've enjoyed this sort of summary of consumables. If you have, let me know what you think in the comments down below. And ask any questions you've got about consumables. Anything I haven't explained properly in this video, ask down below and I'll be sure to get back to you. So yeah, thank you for watching guys, and I shall see you all on the next video.